Hello, everyone. I am so excited and honored to have been invited to come speak with you all about my experience in ABA and my perspectives on the field. So thank you so much for this invitation and for the amazing work that you all are doing. So I'm first going to just share a little bit about my personal experience and journey in ABA, and then I'll get to how that kind of informed how I think about the field now and the work that I'm doing. I'm just going to share my screen here. So my journey in ABA happened accidentally, like many of ours. So like many of us in the field, I just kind of stumbled upon it. I first fell in love with the field of ABA as an undergraduate student at the University of Minnesota. I took a class with Dr. Eric Larson and was paired with a family who was receiving ABA services. I didn't know what ABA was. I didn't know what autism was, but I went to this family's home a couple times every week and just found it magical. So I watched this little 3-year-old boy go from hitting, throwing, self-injurious behaviors, meltdowns, kind of you name it, to using his language to communicate his needs. And at the time I worked in an after school program and did some childcare. And so I started just applying the principles I was learning, the really simple principles I was learning in those positions, and was amazed at how well they worked. They made things easier for the kids I worked with. They helped me provide really clear expectations and instructions and respond to them in ways that just made sense to me. And so I immediately knew that this was the path I needed to take. And I started to search for behavior therapist positions and entered the field in that way. So from being a behavior therapist in homes and schools, I went on to become a BCABA and then a BCBA before continuing on to get my PhD. And I've worked in a variety of settings, so clinical settings, home settings. I've worked in schools. I've run a small private practice. And today I work at the University of Washington, where I've taught students very similar classes to the one that I took when I first fell in love with the field. So fast forward a decade from when I first got introduced to ABA, and my own daughter was about 4 and started having meltdowns daily. She was in by the way, I have her permission to talk about her and her behaviors and her experience too. So she was flipping furniture. She was having aggression towards us and her younger brother. I had a 1-year-old at the time and was pregnant with my 3rd child. So I just, in my mind, knew I needed ABA. I needed this service that I've seen help so many kids learn how to communicate, decrease behaviors that were interfering with their quality of life and that of their families. And so I knew that I needed to look for ABA support. And so I started this journey from a different perspective as a parent to look for support for my daughter. And I started just exploring on social media like we do, right? Exploring the autism groups, trying to learn more about how to support my daughter. And I asked to join a group. And I wrote about this in my article as well. I asked to join a group that was recommended to me called Ask Me, I'm Autistic. And so when I asked to join the group, I said, I want to join because I'm a parent and also a service provider, and I just want to learn more to do better. And I got a message, this is just part of it, saying, we're sorry, we're not going to admit you. We don't allow applied behavior analysts in the group unless they're prepared to consider leaving the profession. And they offered me some resources to help me start that process. And this was the first time I really encountered like the severe criticisms about ABA. So I went in to then see all the criticisms about, cookie cutter approaches and not being trauma informed and not supporting neurodiversity. And this led me to a lot of confusion and, to be honest, defensiveness at first. So I had a lot of thoughts like, I don't think you know what I'm actually talking about, or thoughts like, That's never the kind of ABA I've done, or thoughts like you just don't understand what we're talking about. We're not talking about the same thing. And so that was going on in my mind, where I was feeling unsure and confused about what was happening and how people were describing the field. And at the same time, at home, I still needed support with my family. So I went on to search for services, for ABA services for my daughter, and I ran into issue upon issue myself in the field. So some people just didn't respond to my inquiries at all. And some responses, I felt like compassion was really lacking, or folks didn't tell me, they said that they were full and didn't tell me where I could find services. And I finally found a place that took about half a year to get from then the first day of services through all the insurance authorizations and paperwork and assessments before our daughter's first day of services. And then it didn't work. And I won't go into too many details, because I did write about that in this article too, but it didn't work for our family. We didn't feel supported in the services, in working through the behaviors that we needed support with. And I knew as a BCBA that we needed support through a functional behavior assessment, and we needed to replace some of those aggressive behaviors with some communication. And I just needed somebody else to take a look and really help us work through how we could embed this. And so I was pretty crushed and wondered if maybe I was wrong about the things I had grown to love about ABA. I considered leaving the field. I still felt some defensiveness, and just kind of really wasn't sure what to think. But I still really believed in the science. And luckily for me, I've been surrounded by colleagues who are also BCBAs and helped me through this tricky part. So they helped me kind of think about, what kind of ABC data do you need to take? Things I know but couldn't apply as her own parent. How do we replace those behaviors? What kind of functional communication can we teach? We reinforced positive interactions with her little brother at the time. And then when the other one came along with him as well. And I just kept thinking that the science can't be wrong. I had a hard time believing that the science itself was wrong, because I knew that people were using it in health and fitness goals. I knew that people were using it to help people adhere to medical protocols, like taking insulin or taking inhalers for asthma. And people were using it in businesses and bringing in behavioral professionals to help with employee satisfaction and performance, and sustainability, and so much more. So I knew that there wasn't really something wrong with the science, and it worked, but was worried about the way it was applied in my own situation. And with my daughter, it worked. So I'll end my little intro with this little story. So you can see here, after we started teaching her some techniques for coping, some self-management strategies, we started teaching her how to communicate her needs, how to tell us when she was overstimulated, how to tell us when she needed a break, or when she needed to talk, or when she needed just some one-on-one attention. And I remember this note in this time where she started to communicate, and have saved this picture of it. So in case you can't read 5-year-old handwriting, it says, "Mom, I want you to know that if I say that I don't love you, I do love you." And so she was really kind of working through, how do I communicate this? And she and I talk about it a lot now, this time, of how she was learning, and we're obviously still working on it. We still apply ABA techniques in our family, in our day-to-day lives all the time. We've been using it to help desensitize for dental visits that have caused a lot of anxiety. We've used it to help our kids participate in morning routines or in help around the house. So we've got our visual supports, we use prompting, we use reinforcement. And so we apply the science every day for so many aspects of our lives. We have not continued on with any sort of structured ABA program. And through this process, I've really kind of reflected on what needs to change with our application of ABA. And this has informed my interests in our field and what it means to make change and to reform the field. So I gained a new perspective on the field that I'll discuss next after this introduction, and have been working a little bit towards that reform of the field. So thanks for listening to the introduction. Next, I'll talk about our coalition for the reform of applied behavior analysis and how my experience and that of my colleagues kind of led to this formation of this group and the work we're doing today. Hello again. So I talked a little bit previously about my own perspective, my story, and how it's informed my ideas about the field of ABA today. And now I want to share the work that I've been working towards with colleagues on reform in the field and just kind of my ideas for that. Okay. So my experience, I quickly learned, was very, very much not unique. And many people have had very similar experiences with finding ABA services for their families. And that combined with experiences of my colleagues as professionals in the field being disappointed with some of the practices they we're seeing kind of led to the formation of this coalition for the reform of applied behavior analysis that I'd like to talk about a little bit now. So this group started completely accidentally. For many months, I was meeting with my colleague, Dr. Ashley Penny, about academic writing. And every time Ashley and I met, we got into a conversation about the state of the field and what to do about it. And we realized that we had been having these conversations with other colleagues in our network and figured they must be happening elsewhere too. So we started just talking to people, and we gathered a group of colleagues just kind of around the University of Washington area that felt similarly to have a discussion about what could we do about these issues that we were seeing in the field. What could we do about the things that parents like me had experienced and all the other experiences that were less than optimal. And again, always still believing in the science of ABA, always still believing that ABA has something to offer and that we don't want to just let it go. So from there, from having some small group meetings in our own network, we decided to host a brainstorming meeting, we called it, and we posted it widely in just various networks and on social media. We put something out, actually I'll talk about it a little bit later, asking folks if they are interested in reform of the field and have since grown a group. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So a little, just like before going in too much, the idea about this group and my own perspective on the field is that there's a lot of nuance to this discussion. So we are hearing a lot of criticism about ABA, and we should take it seriously and respond to it and make sure we're making changes. And at the same time, we can also honor and know that ABA has something to offer towards improvement in quality of life. It's not everything, but it has something to offer, and that we don't have to let it go entirely. So many of us have seen really kind of extreme arguments on either end, either completely drop ABA, it's abusive, nobody should have that, or ABA can save the world. And so just thinking about nuance is really important when we talk about reform, and thinking about all the in-between parts of the discussion. So we can have this discussion about how can we change the application of ABA without abandoning the science. So what do we mean when we say ABA reform? A few things. One is we're talking about changing applications of the science that lead to improved outcomes. And what this looks like can be a lot of different things. So I also want to stress that I don't believe it's enough to say that, well, that was the old ABA or the ABA of the past, or we're doing progressive ABA now, or today's ABA, because that kind of distinguishes between two different kinds of ABA. What we want to see in the reform movement, and why we've called it reform, is we want to see change for the whole field, all of the application of the field. And we can see this in many different categories. So we can see this in BCBA training, for example, or supervision practices. We can see it in the way agency policies are written and implemented, or in the way service is delivered. We can talk about how we can be neurodiversity affirming in our practice, and how we can include different aspects into our university training programs, into continuing education, and so on. The list is not exhaustive, and it can go on based on what you're seeing, what folks are seeing that needs change in their practice. But the idea is that it should be global, and it should be to all of ABA. So that leads to improved outcomes kind of across the board. And also, just to note, this idea of reform isn't unique to our field. So we talk about reform, at least in the United States, when we talk about the education system, when we talk about the healthcare system, when we talk about juvenile justice, for example. So it's become a hot topic for some reason to suggest that ABA needs reform. And I'll tell a little story about that later, but it's not unique to us, and all fields that are based on a science are always reforming and changing and having these big moments where folks realize that the way we've been applying things isn't current and isn't working. So for our group, our process towards reform has been organizing meetings of like-minded behavior analysts, connecting the work that's already being done. And this part is really important, because we never decided to form this group to dictate how reform work should be done. We know that it's already happening. There are so many people doing such good work to make changes in the field, but they're doing them kind of in isolation sometimes. And we want to be a hub where people can connect that work and learn from each other and share resources. And we want to grow in numbers. So we want to make sure that we're having an impact on the new BCBAs in the field who might be trained to do kind of that business as usual ABA, to think about, well, what does it mean to make some of these changes and how we're working with our clients. Our mission in the Coalition for the Reform of ABA is to create a community of people working to improve the lives of consumers of applied behavior analysis through the reform of current application and practice in the field. So again, our focus really is on that community. We're creating a community, we're connecting people, we're connecting work, we're sharing resources, but we're not saying these are the steps for how reform needs to happen. So when we first started, we sent out this flyer on social media, and we said, are you an ABA provider who would like to see change in our field? We talked about our mission, and we said, join our first ABA reform brainstorming meeting, just to kind of see who agrees with us, how many people are worried about the field, is this something that other people are feeling? And when we first posted this, we posted it in a lot of big like social media ABA groups. And this got declined from one of the bigger groups that has something like 27,000 members. And the admins told us that the field of ABA does not need reform, but practitioners need direct services, or need additional training and supervision. And so we realized that word reform is a loaded word, and we're hoping to kind of change that, because to us, reform means rethinking our training and supervision. We did end up getting it posted in different groups. We've had a lot of conversations about what do we mean when we talk about reform, and I hope we can continue having those conversations and continue to define it. But we did get a lot of interest within just a few days. So when we put out this flyer, we got 498 registrants that signed up to join our meeting or to learn more about the work we were hoping to do. Most of those were BCBAs. There were other people that had joined. We had people that were family members, related service providers, and others. We had people that were working across the spectrum of type of work, so home-based, clinic-based, school-based ABA. We had people in administration and higher education and research. And most of the people that joined had been working in the field for 10 plus years, which was really promising to us, that these were that people that have been around for a while see the need for reform. We had lots of represented locations, most states in the United States, 19 other regions, including Brazil. And so we've been kind of developing the group as we run it, because again, it was an accidental group. So we're learning as we go. It's all volunteer based. So as you can imagine, it's pretty slow going, but we have lots of goals for the future of what this could look like. And we really want to hear from folks and work with people to continue to organize this work. So we don't see ourselves as directors of this work, but more organizers to create a space. So we want to create a space for problem solving, a space for collaboration, to share resources. Like, for example, a lot of people are already working towards things. People have talked about how to use how to gain client assent in programming. And so sometimes people will post a question saying, how do I do this? Or can somebody point me to a resource? And some other folks who have already done the work can include that. We really want people to learn through storytelling. We can learn a lot from each individual's unique experience with ABA, good or bad. So, for example, I learned from my own experience with ABA for my daughter, what I wanted to change. I've also learned what works for embedding it in my family life. And we really want to create a platform to elevate voices we aren't otherwise hearing. So those stories that aren't being told, we want to really find them, hear them, and share them. So at this point, we're just on Facebook, but we are working on a website with a forum for groups to join, or for members to join groups to discuss whatever they want to discuss. We've recently done a survey of our group of priorities for reform, and we're working on analyzing that data. So stay tuned for that information coming too. So hopefully you'll join us and find us by searching on Facebook, the Coalition for the Reform of Applied Behavior Analysis, and kind of follow us and collaborate with us and reach out to us and tell us what your ideas are. We really want to hear from you. And then I'll just end on some personal goals for the field based on my story and the work we've been doing and the work the conversations I've had with my amazing collaborators. So the first is that I hope that we can start to embrace the nuance and stop those absolutist statements such as ABA doesn't need reform or all ABA is abuse. So we hear these blanket statements about the application of ABA all the time, from things like the way hours are prescribed to the goals we do or don't work on. Thinking in absolutes, I think, is going to really prevent us from individualizing. So, for example, even something like listening to the neurodiverse community talk about how difficult it is to work on eye contact, it might be really tempting to say, well, I will never work on eye contact. But if we say that, we might miss that case of where it's important for the individual and their culture to work on eye contact, where they want to work on eye contact. If we say we always see clients in clinic and at home, such as what happened in my case with my own daughter. We might miss the case like mine, where families just need that support at home, or where families can't juggle driving to the clinic with their other kids. And so just really thinking about the nuance and thinking about ways to listen to different voices and different perspectives and think really critically about the choices we make, but not saying things that are just absolute statements, which is tricky. My other personal goal for the field and for, I think, reform in the field is to see us share our science a little bit more. So this for me comes from a personal example. During my doctoral studies, I was doing some parent coaching on how to apply some basic ABA strategies to mealtime. And the strategy of that week was how to use what we call the pre-MAC principle, but what I introduced as just first then statements, how to help give instructions in a way that children know what's coming. First, let's put on our shoes, and then we can go do whatever. And a parent had a really successful mealtime at home after learning this, and then she tried to apply it to the morning routine for putting on shoes and getting out the door, and she was on time to school. And she came up to me and said, Yev, this really worked. All it was a first then statement. It was so easy. And I just have one question. Why don't I already know this? Why didn't I know this? As a parent of a preschooler or a toddler, why didn't I already know how to give a first then statement to make my life easier and help my child? And so from then on, that's been a goal for me to really think about how are we going to share our science so people can use behavioral strategies without having to enroll in, an intensive program if that's not what they need. And then third, I just hope that we can start to think a little bit more creatively about what ABA could look like in the 2020s. When we started the service models we have today, we were in a very different time. And so thinking about the current landscape, what could service delivery look like today? There are some different service delivery models that people are trying out there. For example, there are people working on parent-led ABA models where parents are taught to, instead of using a behavior technician, parents are taught themselves to work with their children. And being given those skills goes along with sharing our science. In Washington State, we have school behavior analyst positions that work similarly to speech language pathologists or occupational therapists in schools, and can bring services right into where kids are already learning and already spend their days instead of pulling kids out. Others are thinking creatively about telehealth to bring ABA services to more remote areas. And so I personally would love to see ABA embedded more in those environments where our consumers of our science, our clients, the kids we work with, the individuals we work with already spend their time. So how can we embed our principles into the dental office or into school or into soccer practice? And this sounds idealistic and will take a lot of creative problem solving to think about the barriers and how to work through those. But I'd like to see us as a field start asking those questions and then understanding what those barriers are. So I clearly have my opinions and obviously don't know what those answers are going to be. But in general, I think the most important thing is just to continue to have these dialogues. So once again, I just so appreciate this invitation, the time to share my perspective, and really welcome more dialogue around these topics, and hope that you'll reach out. Thanks so much for having me.